1490 WLCX, real news and great conversation for La Crosse. Here's your Daily News Roundup.
For Civic Media News, I'm James Kelly. The Wisconsin Elections Commission has declined to share the state's unredacted voter rolls with the U.S. Department of Justice. The Department of Justice requested that voter roll information from all 50 states, claiming that the information is needed to enforce election laws. There are publicly available and redacted versions of the state's voter rolls that can be purchased, but the unredacted lists contain personal information that is not publicly available, like the Social Security numbers and driver's license information of voters. The Wisconsin Elections Commission, which is composed of 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, voted to send a letter to the Department of Justice on Thursday declining the request. They determined that the Department of Justice had not provided a suitable explanation for how that information will be used, and that state law explicitly prohibits them from sharing those unredacted voter rolls. Over a dozen other states have also refused to provide their unredacted voter rolls, which prompted the Department of Justice to file lawsuits against them. As challenges to Wisconsin's congressional district boundaries make their way through the courts, it remains unclear if they will be decided before the 2026 midterm election. The Wisconsin Supreme Court has appointed separate judicial panels to consider a pair of lawsuits challenging the state's congressional district boundaries ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. According to a WISN report, however, the co-founder of one of the firms that filed the lawsuit over the congressional maps says he's not expecting a resolution until the spring of 2027, after scheduling hearings were held on Friday. The Wisconsin Supreme Court has previously declined to hear other challenges to the state's congressional map, but decided that it had no choice but to establish the panels under a process created by Republican lawmakers 14 years ago. The groups filing the lawsuit say their goal is to have fair maps in Wisconsin, pointing to the disparity between the narrow results of typical statewide elections and the 6-2 Republican advantage with congressional seats. For Civic Media News, I'm James Kelly.
The Packers get beat by the Broncos. Hi, I'm Mike Clemens with Sports NFL. Green Bay was up 23-14 in the third quarter, but the Denver Broncos came roaring back to win 34-26, their 11th victory in a row. The Packers making key mistakes on offense. I talked to wide receiver Jaden Reed.
I hold myself accountable because late in the game, in a critical moment, I ran the wrong route. So I take the blame for that, and I do think, that's the reason why we're in this position. I hold myself accountable. I'm very critical of myself. We just all got to be on point to give ourselves the best chance.
On defense, Micah Parsons suffering a season-ending torn ACL. NBA, the Bucks got bounced in Brooklyn, 127-82. Doc Rivers.
We gave up 30 points in turnovers. The basketball guys decided you can't make any open shots now. You don't deserve it. So that was disappointing. Probably one of the more disappointing games I've ever been involved in.
That's Bucks head coach Doc Rivers. With sports, I'm Mike Clemens.
Partly to mostly cloudy today. We'll get to the mid to upper 20s for a high this afternoon with just a light southwesterly breeze. Tonight, mostly cloudy. We're going to drop to around 10 or 11 degrees for a low. Tomorrow, partly to mostly cloudy with a high in the upper 30s to near 40. I'm meteorologist Sean Cable.
That's your La Crosse News Roundup from WLCX. Find more news anytime at lacrosseeagle.com. Subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you find your podcasts.